All right, so welcome back to the second part of the ghost story that I'm supposed to be telling you. So today we are in an undisclosed location. I'd like to thank Mike, who is responsible for setting up this particular place the way it's been set up. It's almost a virtual Victorian bookstore, so it's pretty appropriate to be telling stories in an old kind of dimly lit bookstore. So thanks, Mike, for doing that. I really just wanted to also mention a couple of other books that include haunting material or ghost material that comes from maybe Ontario. A couple of authors, De Silva, D-A, and then S-A-L-I-V-A, and Hines have written a couple of books, or more than a couple, but written some books on hauntings and ghosts, ghosts in Ontario, more ghosts in Ontario. There's one on the nautical end of it as well, and ghost town stories from ghost towns. So that's a fairly good series. I don't have any of those to hand, but if you check online, you can probably find them. Some of them I think are out of print. Some of them you can still get. But that takes me to the next part of what I'd like to say, and I really feel that I should talk about a ghost story, and you're going to think this is funny when we get to the end, but this is how it worked. For a number of years, I was always in touch with people who were kind of fringy. There's a lot of fringy people. There was a collector in the area who was very obsessive about the things he collected. I know he started off collecting Red Skelton stuff, if anybody remembers Red Skelton from the 50s and 60s, I guess, but mainly the 50s. He collected Red Skelton stuff, and then I think later on he started to collect Stomping Tom stuff. Now I'm going to tell you how serious a collector he was. I saw Stomping Tom at the Commodore in the late 60s, and I'm not sure whether the collector got Tom's stomping board from the Commodore, but he one day he came up to me and proudly showed me the Tom Connor stomping board that he'd found, and then I think he moved on from there to doing some Barry Manilow. That's an odd connection, but he liked the Barry Manilow stuff. But anyway, I'd heard a story that someone had sort of frozen to death near this place that we're in right now. And I mentioned it to him, and at that point he was very seriously into doing ghost research. He had all the equipment. He has, seismographs, and he had all the imaging, the heat imaging stuff. And so I accidentally mentioned to him that, I'd been told that, and I don't know whether it's true or not anyway. I was told that blah, 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 and he went ballistic. He said, we can come out and check it out if you want. And I said, well, I don't know. I was a little leery. He said, well, I know. I mean, we'll be there all night. And I thought, I don't know. And eventually he badgered me into letting him and his cohorts come out with all of their stuff to check this all out to see if there was any ghosts in this particular area. He figured there would be. Well, sadly to say, I got his written report, typed out report, all very official, that there were no real signs of ghosts in this particular virtual Victorian bookshop. So that's a ghost story, but it's actually, I would say, it's a ghost story, not. All right, and with that, I think probably it would be time to move on to the highlight of the ghost story, ghost story day today, and it's going to be Jamie Hunter. And Jamie will tell you a little bit of his background, he's quite an interesting storyteller, and he's very, very knowledgeable in the area of the history of the trails. And my perspective was that I wanted him to move from my particular story about Saint Marie and perhaps a ghost in the church, to move along those trails which were so important in Canada. I mean, the native people had a coast to coast trail in the well long before we ever did. And he's going to talk a little bit about those trails and the importance of the trails and how the trails evolved in the Coldwater area and the importance, because the focus is on Simcoe County, and we're sort of moving back into the Coldwater area with this little episode from Jamie. And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie at this point, and there you go, Jamie. Give us what you got.
All right. So, one aspect of local history is trails. And most archaeologists don't pursue trails today because they're very, very difficult to identify. But this gentleman, Andrew Frederick Hunter, who is a much earlier archaeologist and historian, was very interested in trails, and he began collecting trail information about 1875. And that was a period when the trails were still discernible as the area was being developed. And what he did is he created a map of a series, first of all, the Wendat, or the Huron, had about 20 villages at any given time, and they were usually located in the interior, and they were connected by trails. So there's quite a sophisticated trail system, even at the time of the Wendat. And ultimately, this is Lake Couchiching, this is Bass Lake, this is Lake Simcoe, and of course, this is Georgian Bay. And this region was occupied by the Atarancho-Ronoho and the Arenda-Ronoho, which are two nations of the Huron Confederacy. And the group up here in Georgian Bay had 4 villages, and the group down here had 3 villages, of which Cayagwe was the most important. So all of these villages were interconnected with these very large trails. And Andrew Hunter recorded the location of a lot of these trails because he was able to talk to the original land settlers. He was able to observe that not only were there archaeological sites, not only burial sites, but there was a very extensive trail system. So moving forward, after the Wendat are dispersed between 1647 and 1651, the area was colonized by about 1700 by the Anishinaabe, or the Ojibwe, and they maintained quite a sizable population. We think about 2,500 people in the area of Lake Couchiching and the area up eventually into Bosley Island. And the reason that this area was so popular was the fact that the fish weirs, you've got about 75,000 stakes driven into the soil between Couchiching and Simcoe. And this provided a wonderful walkway, if you will, for Native people walking to the east. One of the impediments to being able to go throughout Huronia was the Wye River and the Wye Swamp. And when the Jesuits built their site at St. Marie among the Hurons in 1639, by 1641-42, they had built a rowboat, a shallop, and that shallop would then convey people across the Isiriagi or Wye River to enable people to travel much more efficiently than having to walk all the way down to Wye Bridge and around. So that's sort of the Huron and the Jesuit story. The Anishinaabe were living usually in the lacustrine lake areas, but they did have very extensive overland corridors or areas between various lakes. And about 1800, the Indian Reserve, as it was called in Coldwater, was actually established about 1826, and there was a very extensive road built between Coldwater, which of course has access to Georgian Bay, and ultimately to Lake Simcoe. And with this map done in 1831, it very carefully describes in red, I don't know whether you can see that, but this route becomes what's referred to as the Coldwater Road. It's later extended from Coldwater all the way through to Tayport, which is a very early community on Georgian Bay that was really the steamboat location for Eastern travelers going down through either the Trent Severn or overland. So the history of trails in the Coldwater area really does have a long and interesting history. And ultimately, the Highway 12, which basically goes between Coldwater and eventually Midland, utilized some part of the original Coldwater road of the 1830s. Another road that came off the Penetanguishene Road, called the Gloucester Road, came up through Mount St. Louis and over to Tayport by 1845. So you get the slow development in origins, and it's not until 1850, 1860, 1870 that all the concessions begin to be built. So the road system was actually quite extensive, but it did not follow many of the original native trails or native portages between the various bodies of water. So that's just a brief introduction to the use and importance of trails in the Coldwater area.
Thanks so much, Jamie. That was really, really great. It was really helpful in learning a little bit more about the trails and the history, certainly in the Coldwater area, and how it relates to the rest of Simcoe County and its history. And good night, goodbye, and I'll see what I can do for a ghost next week. It may be a War of 1812 ghost, but I'm not sure. I'll have to find out.